welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rich, and I'm joined by my guest, Gregor Vuga of Red Moose Games. Hey Gregor, welcome to the show.
Hi Rich, how are you doing?
Good. Hey, so I'm curious, how long have you been playing Powered by the Apocalypse games?
Actually, I got into the play test itself. I somehow got a hold of the PDF on Vincent's forums, and we played pretty much immediately.
Man, so that's a pretty good little gateway to get right in the source.
Yep.
Let's skip over and read a Sitch. Read a Sitch. Gregor, when we were getting ready for this, you said that one of the questions that you often get when playing Apocalypse World itself is pretty interesting. How have you dealt with, how do I just shoot somebody?
Yeah, because people are used to having just like a general I attack role in their role-playing games. Mm-hmm. And Apocalypse World has two specific roles, which are Go Aggro and Seize by Force. I'm talking about the first edition here. Second edition, there's something
right,
a little bit different. And those are like your general combat roles, but neither of them is I attack. So people were sometimes confused, like, okay, I'm just trying to snipe somebody from a distance. What do I roll? There's no roll. And they were confused about what to do in those situations. But yeah, the answer is basically most of the time you just shoot them.
Yeah.
You know, the general to do it rule of Apocalypse World and its engine.
If someone was a sniper and they had the drop on somebody,
mm-hmm.
you just have them deal their damage?
Yeah, initially that's pretty much what I did. Vincent then suggested using Go Aggro as a move that covers those situations. You just interpret it a bit differently. But yeah, basically you just deal your damage. If you have a drop on somebody, if there's nothing they can do to escape the harm, you deal your harm. That's how I usually dealt with that situation.
Cool. I know that John Harper on his blog, he talked about using Act Under Fire in similar situations where it just seemed kind of fuzzy about are you going aggro or are you trying to seize by force? He would often use Act Under Fire. And I've used that a lot of times myself. I'm pretty thankful for second edition because it could get kind of fuzzy.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, Act Under Fire is like a generic role that you can use for a lot of things. It's like a save, you could say, in D&D parlance. You know, when there's doubt if you can do something, you can use Act Under Fire for those situations. If there's doubt that you could actually hit the person from a distance, if there's something pressuring you, or if there's a danger or some chance of you missing the roll, then Act Under Fire is also a great choice.
It is, but what you do with Act Under Fire is you're effectively kind of taking away any choices that the player can make because they either do it or you're going to give them a hard choice, which is similar to Go Aggro, but it's worked a lot of times when it's one of those, I really want dice to determine if this thing happens, right? Otherwise, a sniper's pretty darn deadly because that's a gunlugger gun and that thing deals tons of damage, and with the amount of harm that an NPC can take, you're just a death machine. And maybe that's cool in the game that you want to play, right? Or maybe it isn't.
Yeah, that actually happened a lot in the first game that we played, because the gunlugger was basically just mowing people down left and right. This was still an earlier version, so the gunlugger was actually even deadlier back then, I think. And it took a while to just get used to it and go with the flow, except that being a fan of this character and letting him have his like cool stuff was just part of the game. And the gunlugger being a complete badass and also a murderer basically was part of the going with the flow of the game. But it depends on your game.
It does.
If you want to change the flavor or something, that's a different thing.
I've had people complain like, well, the gunlugger just rolls over everyone when they can deal out this much damage. They have this much armor. how do you threaten them? So in this first game, or maybe in the later iterations, how are you a fan of a gunlugger but still trying to make their lives interesting?
You throw problems at them that can't be solved by violence. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's definitely the best. When you throw them in a situation where shooting a gun is just a terrible idea, that's the best way to do it, I think.
Yeah, it is, because once they're a gang and they do 3 harm by default.
Yeah.
Well, let's head on and open our brain.
Open your brain.
All right, for this Open Our Brain, I am excited, Gregor, because I'll be honest with you, I backed your way back.
It's been a while.
I backed your Indiegogo because people have created games and hacks of games and hacks of those hacks of games since I backed Sagas of the Icelanders on Indiegogo. And I've heard Keith Stetson is like your love child for this game. He loves this game so much. He posts about it all the time. Tell me a little bit about Sagas of the Icelanders. What's the deal with this game?
Okay, so I wanted to make a Viking RPG for a while back then, and I already had like a basic rule set that I made on my own, and then suddenly this playtest came about of Vincent's Apocalypse World, and I immediately saw the potential for hacking it for other stuff. Even now, years later, I still remember jotting down in my notebook the phrase "bar forth Gothica."
Nice.
Because I immediately had this idea of using the rule set for running like a, let's say, Ravenloft style game. But yeah, then I suddenly realized that the context of the Icelandic sagas had a lot in common with the Wild West and shows like Deadwood. And then I read an article online of somebody suggesting that HBO should actually start making a show based on the Icelandic sagas. And Apocalypse World itself is kind of like an HBO show, like with all the drama and blood and sex and murder.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
These things just kind of fell into place all at once. And I said to myself, yeah, sure, let's make a Viking game based on the Apocalypse World engine. So then I kind of had to constrain myself creatively, and instead of just making a generic Viking game, I made a very historical, fairly realistic game that's set in a specific time and place, and I chose 9th, 10th century Iceland, the period of the sagas.
So you started with the Apocalypse engine as the base and built a game from the engine?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I had the setting and I had the engine, and then I just tweaked the engine until I got it to work together with the setting.
One of the things I find fascinating about Sagas of the Icelanders is the approach towards gender.
Mm-hmm.
You have a woman playbook. How did that decision come about? Like, why did you decide there has to be a woman playbook?
It was a very hard decision, but basically while I was reading the source material, I realized, well, wait a second, I'm doing a historical game in this society, in this period, and this is actually a sexist society. It's, by modern standards, it's pretty liberal in some aspects, but in others it's pretty constrained and very misogynistic and so on. So I had a choice. Either I could just erase these ugly bits, pretend that they didn't exist, and make a more fantastical and positive vision of this period, or I could tackle them head on. So that's what I decided to do. And it kind of made sense at the time for me to just separate the characters into 2 groups. Separate the basic moves into 2 groups and the playbooks into 2 groups, falling along the lines of gender, as it was perceived by that society, by that culture.
By tackling it that way, what did you see as a positive once people started playing in those gender roles?
Well, I'm reluctant to say it's didactic, but in a way it shows the period as it was. But at the same time, it shows as well how constrained and reductive it is. Players starting out with this system, this specific game, often feel very limited in their moveset about what they can do, about what choices they can make, because the moves are very restrictive in this aspect. The game then, slowly, as you play, offers you various opportunities to contradict this culture, to change it, to subvert these gender roles, to do stuff about it. So it's also cathartic in a way. It starts with a pretty terrible situation that you probably don't enjoy, and then gives you tools to do something about it. Which is kinda also what Apocalypse World does, when it gives you this broken, destroyed world, wasteland, and then asks you, like, what are you gonna do with this ruin?
I gotta ask, when you look at the moves that are offered to the woman, how do women fight? There is no dedicated physical move for them. What do they do?
It's the same question as with the Apocalypse World thing, where you ask, how do I shoot somebody? It's simply a matter of interpreting the situation. Basically, like we said earlier, that you can fall back on Act Under Fire in Apocalypse World. Sagas also has a generic Tempt Fate move, which is basically a test your luck kind of thing. And in situations where there's danger or when you're risking something, that's a good move to fall back onto. If a woman just wants to stab somebody, she stabs somebody. You don't need a move for that. She just deals harm. And that's how you deal with most of the situation. In case she's, of course, risking something, if, the person is fighting back, then you could use Tempt Fate, for example.
Cool. If you were to highlight what mechanics are most different in this game versus Apocalypse World, what are the ones that people kind of tweak their head if they're coming from Apocalypse World 1st or 2nd edition?
I think it's the basic distinction between female and male moves. Because when you create your character, you pick a gender, male or female, and based on that you get a different set of basic moves. So I think that was the most, let's say, revolutionary part of this design that a lot of people then were inspired by. I'm fairly certain that Jason Morningstar's Night Witches was at least partially inspired by this, when it separates the moves into night moves and day moves, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it's this distinction then that if you offer players a different set of basic moves that they don't have in common, then you kind of shape play in a different way. So yeah, I think that was the main distinction.
What's your favorite move and why?
I think it's a move that probably doesn't get used much at all, because it's kind of tucked into the back of the book. It's one of the things that I would probably change if I had the time and opportunity to actually do a second edition or something. It's the two religion moves, specifically when you die a pagan and when you die a Christian, because they shape the long-term campaign play. Because once you trigger those moves, when your character dies and that move happens, something pretty significant is gonna change about the world, one way or the other. They're meant to signify the passage of time and how society is changing as generations change and people die and new people move into their place. So yeah, I think those two are my favorites.
That is really cool. Yeah, I've never seen that on the basic sheet. That's in the book though, at the back.
And I kind of regret it. I should have probably just made them kind of core moves.
All right, well, Gregor, I'd really like to get this to the table, man. Do you think you could run this for a minute or two for me?
Yeah, sure.
It is time to act under fire. All right, Gregor. Why don't you kick this off, man?
So, Rich, let's play a bit of Sagas of the Icelanders. First things first, I'm gonna have to ask you to pick a gender for your character, as we said. it's the first choice a player makes.
I will play a guy.
Okay, male. So if you were playing basically the full game, this is just a quick test or demo, you would then choose one of the playbooks, and they're separated by gender, so this would constrain your choices, first of all. Second of all, you need to pick your stats, which are 4, and they're versed, which is basically how experienced, skill, and wise you are. Then there's young, which signifies like physical ability and strength and so on, health. Then there's gendered, which represents how well you fit into the stereotype that society has of your gender. It's basically, do you fit in with society's views of what you should be doing or not? And then finally there's weird, but spelled with an Y, and it's an Anglo-Saxon word which means fate. It's related to the Old Norse word, I think it's pronounced Earth, or Earth, or I'm not sure, and it's basically the stat represents like how fated you are, if you're special in some way, if you're touched by the gods and so on.
I am going to go with the Huskarl.
Okay.
And I think he's going to be a +0 on versed and a +1 on young, +1 on gendered, and -1 on weird.
Okay.
I imagine has a braided beard and a big proud face, and he's a bit hulking. He's kind of a big guy.
So let's just jump right into it then. The landscape of Iceland is quite rough most of the time. There are lava fields of hard rock and rocky terrain and fjords and so on. But there are some pleasant valleys where people that have settled this land have put down their stuff and built houses and farms and so on. And these farms are pretty far from one another. They are basically like homesteads where people work and live, but they're very isolated places. And huskarls are basically, if you would translate it kind of directly, they're house carls, so they're like house men. They serve as guards and servants of the master of the house.
Okay, cool.
In this case, because you're being a big burly huskarl guard for this merchant who lives on a farm in a fjord, and you've been helping him with various stuff, even perhaps sailing his boat and so on. So for our love letter, just roll 2 dice and add your gendered to see how well you have been performing your role.
Okay, I've got a +1 in gendered. Surprise, surprise. Because this is +1 forward. Here we go. I have rolled a 10, a 6 + 3, and that is a 10.
That's excellent. So things have been going very great. The merchant has been doing a lot of very profitable runs back to the mainland, back to Norway and so on. And the farm has been prospering, and you have protected it and helped him in every way you can. And one day, this merchant master of yours is away on some business, and you see a man approaching the house from the sea. He is alone and walking slowly towards the farm. And as he approaches, you notice that he's wearing some ragged clothes that seem pretty old and torn, and he doesn't seem to have much possessions about him, which is a pretty unusual sight in these lands. How do you greet him?
Well, I know the many tales of courtesy to strangers and when you're rude, and often it's not really just some haggard man, but could actually be someone powerful that curses you. So I will observe hospitality. I'll greet him. "Ho there, stranger. Are you all right?
He seems pretty distraught, like as if he just survived some kind of catastrophe, but he doesn't really answer you in any way. He just shakes his head and says, well, I'm just looking for a place to rest my head overnight. Do you mind if I can sleep at your farm?
Do we have any outer building that's not within the house that he could bed down
No,
in?
it's actually just one big farmhouse that everybody shares. There are like sort of closets inside the house that are used to separate the bedrooms of the master and so on. But otherwise it's just one very big house with one big room inside it.
I am the huskarl. The master is away. Come and we can feed you.
He comes inside with you and sits at the fire. Do you ask the servants to bring him some food?
I do. I want to keep an eye on him and try to get a judge of his character. I don't want him sleeping here if he's going to put anyone at risk.
Okay. In this case, do you consider this an uneasy situation?
No, I don't think it's terribly easy. He seems pretty quiet, difficult to read.
Okay. How reading people works in this game, basically you need bonds with them. And you gain bonds, the main way you gain bonds is you give them gifts, because then they're obliged and bound to you. So right now, you don't have any bonds with this guy, but you could like try giving him a gift, which would be the most common way of gaining a bond.
Alright. Can the food substitute as a gift? Or do I need to actually give him a thing? I can give him a thing, I'm just trying to understand.
I think the food would just fall under basic hospitality in this case.
Sure. I'll say, friend, your clothes seem... they seem like they've seen better days. I have a coat. If you're traveling on in the morning, I think you should take it. It will help to keep you warm. We have had some colder nights. I'll get up from the fire and I'll walk over and get one of my woolen coats.
He takes the coat and seems very grateful for it. Yeah, how this worked in Viking society, if you gave somebody a gift, they were basically obliged to kinda repay it one way or the other. So once you give somebody a gift, you strengthen the relationship between these two persons. And since you gave him a gift, you gain a bond. And then there's a basic move that says that when you look into somebody's heart, spend bonds you have with them to ask their player one question per bond spent. And in this case, if you spend your bond with him, you can ask a question like, what does your character wish I would do? Or what does your character intend to do? Or how could I get your character to do something?
Gotcha. Yeah, I see those questions. What does he intend to do? And what's his name? I can ask him, but has he given his name?
You sit down with him as he's eating and enjoying his new cloak, and he slowly tells you a tale, introduces himself as Hrafni, and tells of a tale of his journey from Norway and how his boat crashed a few days ago, somewhere up the coast. And you're trying kind of to discern like what his plan is here or goal.
Yes.
And as you're talking to him, you discover that the purpose of his trip was to avenge a blood feud.
Avenge a blood feud? Hrafni, what has happened? Is this something that happened to your family?
Yes, indeed. My brother was dishonored last year, and it is only now that we could have made this journey. And the person that dishonored my brother was actually your neighbor. It's Ulf from the neighboring valley.
What did Ulf do to your brother?
He stole away his bride.
If Ulf stole your brother's bride, what happened to your brother?
Well, the last time I saw him, was on the ship, but then the ship crashed and we were thrown ashore. So I actually don't know. I have not seen my brother since then.
When you see Ulf, what will you do now? You can't reunite them.
That is true, but honor dictates that I should still slay the person that dishonored my brother to return honor to my family.
What do I know of Ulf?
Not much, because you don't really communicate very much. You keep to yourself, Sitch in your own valley, and so on. But he's a pretty rich farmer. He has a very large flock of sheep and goats. And you know your master has done some business with him. But other than that, you don't really know any details right now.
Would it be possible for the farm that I guard? Would it be safe enough for me to travel with Rafni to see Ulf?
Yeah, sure. It's a big enough farm that it probably has other guards and so on.
Rafni, I will travel with you in the morning. We'll speak with Ulf. Perhaps there is something that can be done here.
Okay. Do we keep playing or?
That's good. Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
Gregor, thank you so much for giving me a taste of Sagas of the Icelanders and coming on Plus One Forward to talk through the game. I really appreciate it.
No problem. You're welcome.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community and Richard Rogers. You can find us on gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at GauntletRPG. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and McGay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Oral Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko Metal version and Process. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Oral Hotbed on their website, savageoralhotbed.com.